But acknowledging that it's broken in the first instance, and acknowledging that we can't really fix it yet, or fix it as fully as we'd like to, doesn't mean that we still can't make the best of it. Right now, our arts and broader not-for-profit governance model is kind of the ultimate expression of one size fits all, even though one size clearly does not fit all, and even though we don't really want it to, right? We know statistically volunteerism is decreasing. A lot of people are struggling right now to get quorum, can keep quorum on our boards. Board burnout is on the rise right now, and I think we're just going to only see more of that in this next little while. And we were just talking in the break about there's a huge proportion of board members who still just see it as an opportunity for a CV building exercise and not really one for active participation or service to the organisation. So this is Michael J. Bobbitt, who was artistic director of the new repertory theatre in Massachusetts at the time. He's now working at the peak state body, the Massachusetts Cultural Council. But he wrote this article about non-profit theatre boards are unrepresentative, out of touch, and often more oppressive than supported. We can and must do better. And fellow creative folks, I honestly think we can come up with a better way to do the accountability, cheerleading, support, and advising that boards at their best could be doing. The way we are currently operating isn't working. I triple dog dare us all to use our imaginative skills to redesign it. So ACT Theatre took up the triple dog dare and decided to reevaluate their hierarchical structure and dissect inequalities within the board, which this is their quote from their artistic director, John Langs. The question we asked most pointedly was, if you can do all this over again, what would you have done differently? And from there, we prepared a roadmap through a committee of governance and a couple other key board members and staff members collectively to talk about what we could do. And the outcome of that meeting was, we have to disrupt the status quo. Voulet, if you don't know his blog, Nonprofit AF, it's worth checking out. But he writes, what this means is that most practices we've associated with boards over the decades are, all caps, completely optional, exclamation point. They are traditions we've just passed down to the point where we think they're legally required, but they're not. The board hires the ED, who says the board meets once a month. Why? The board approves the budget, not necessarily. Many practices are ensconced in bylaws, but bylaws are easily changed. So he talks about the importance of recognising the governance ecology. And I spend a lot of time, and I know my colleagues, consulting colleagues in the room do as well, and everybody who's a CEO, I spend a lot of time trying to get boards to hold that line between governance and operations. And because that's such a tricky line to hold, and because it's, again, when boards step over that line, even with the best intentions, it can cause a lot of friction, it can cause a lot of operational issues and a lot of well-being issues. Because we spend a lot of time, needed time, holding that line, we also, I think, forget that governance is not the sole responsibility of the board. We reinforce a false barrier in order to make things move and work as fluidly as possible. But actually a lot of work of governance, when we break it down, is done at that CEO leadership level. What's the point of hiring a CEO or AD if you don't want their vision for the organisation? And yet we say that the vision is the sole remit of the board. If we can recognise that in a different way, the whole of our organisation can be part of that governance and decision making, and particularly the ones where the expertise lies, which is in our staff and in our artists. Eradicate Robert's rules of order. So all of our board meetings, most of our board meetings, are governed by very familiar chairs, deputy chairs, motions moved, seconded, approved, dissented, mentioned, noted for the record. That's all based on these Roberts rules of order, which, as Bobbitt says, are archaic, pointless, and extremely white. And with that in mind, if we're getting rid of those, how do we investigate new forms of decision making? So what are the emergent strategies? What are the consensus voting within a board group or within a broader governance group? Going back to what we were talking about earlier, what can we learn from non-white and Indigenous ways of thinking and making decisions that we can implement into these very white, very military governed hierarchies. It's, I think, as one of the things as consultants is that we get this strange superpower of being able to track the preoccupations of the sector through the work that we're asked to do. And right now that's around completely reinventing strategic plans, because when we wrote the last ones, no one had heard of COVID-19. So, but it's that process is also happening at a time when, as I've said, everybody is burnt out and exhausted and panicked financially, and so simply don't have the capacity to do that broad, open consultation, which, as you say, is so resource intensive, even though we know it would potentially lead to a better outcome. This really is, I think, the pointy end of our work right at the moment, and not just in a governance sense, but this duty of care to ourselves and to each other. It is a legal and an ethical, a moral concept around the duty that we have to each other, that we all have as humans existing in the same physical or intellectual space, but that duty of care that is enhanced when there are power dynamics and reporting relationship. The entire not-for-profit sector is propped up on people who are there because they love it or because they care about it or because they're invested in some way. And like any industry that's propped up on the passion and hard work of the people who believe in it most, we have always been much better at making sure the show must go on for the benefit of those artists and those audiences, the people who are counting on us, than we have about looking at ourselves. And that's often to our own detriment, certainly financially, but quite often to our health and our relationships. Right now, we're in this space of continual multiple crises. And I almost have whiplash from swinging wildly between being so overwhelmed by the macro and then so overwhelmed by the micro of this one particular issue that I just happen to be a part of a conversation around right now. And it's very hard to, we all have moments of just like, well, how can we give this energy when there is so much being demanded of us and we are not our best selves? But I think just that small conversation was an example of this is not something that is separate to us. Our work is in service to a community, to an art form, yes, but to the artists who make it, to the people who enjoy it, to the arts workers who make it happen. And it is directly connected, like we are in this, we put ourselves in this space because we care. And so we, as small as this might sometimes feel in the greater scheme of the world, this is big. This is not a theoretical exercise, it is having a direct impact on our sector right now, and I think is genuinely putting a whole generation of artists and arts workers and practitioners at risk, because we are seeing people leaving the sector.